Welcome to Inspiration Contagion, the podcast for leaders, founders, and changemakers. Here we explore real stories from transformational business leaders who face fear, uncertainty, and growth head on. Let's lead with inspiration on purpose. Welcome back, my beautiful listeners. If you're listening to this now, it is a new year, a fresh start, and we are here to inspire you in new and bold ways in a very special episode this week. This week, my guest is Hazel Findlay. She is a world-class climber and a genius behind Strong Mind, where she helps people rewrite their relationship with fear. She's been climbing since she was 6 and has taken up one of the boldest walls and big wall routes in the trad sport. What makes her special is how she blends all the experience with practical mindset, coaching, helping climbers, and honestly everyone level up, build confidence, resilience, and trust in themselves. I'm so excited to have her here as somebody who's personally taken her class Strong Mind. In her business Strong Mind, she brings her unique set of skills to hundreds of climbers worldwide, helping them identify where they are stuck in climbing. And with that, welcome, Hazel.
Oh, happy to be here.
So excited to have you here. We're going to start off with one of our general questions we ask every guest on the podcast, and that is, what is your secret sauce, or what makes you such an inspirational leader?
Yeah, that's a hard one, I think, because sometimes I think you don't necessarily know that yourself. But I think what maybe makes me unique is just I, I feel like the level of depth that I bring to what I do. I guess I'm not happy with kind of like the surface level. I try to ask like the next question down, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think that's probably my best answer.
Well, then you're in the right place. I like to ask the really deep questions, the hard questions, questions maybe you haven't thought about. So this will be a great conversation. And so what I wanted to ask you following up on that is, what role has fear or failing or mental training played in shaping your leadership style today and going really deep?
I guess that's such a big question because I guess like my journey like with kind of like fear management and mental training is kind of like who I am now. So it's really hard to kind of separate out who I would be without that, if that makes sense. But I think the main thing is that with the work that I do, where I help other people with like the ways that they might self-sabotage or their fears or their blind spots, is that I would be really bad at that if I didn't do that for myself. So I think that I'm just kind of constantly working on those things for myself on some level, whether that's with my climbing or with my business or just my career in general, or even just like personal life as well, like friendships, relationships. Um, so yeah, I think it's that kind of like that sort of mastery towards self-improvement and self-development.
Yeah. I've also found that in retrospect, as you're sharing that and reflecting myself, what I teach my clients is the medicine I personally need to take repetitively to continue up level and going deeper and just staying a few steps ahead of where I'm bringing and guiding my clients to that next level. So I'm sure that that's probably similar to you. As you said, you're kind of like taking your own medicine and implementing the things that you're teaching in every aspect of your life.
Yeah, totally. And I think just like being humble as well with like um the idea that you don't know everything about yourself yet and that you still have things to learn and develop um about yourself. And then also I just learn from the people we work with too. Like, like clients will like I'll maybe teach something or say something, and then they'll come back to me and be like, "Oh, I felt this," or "I think about it in this way." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that's a really interesting way of thinking about it." So it's the learning is going both ways as well.
100%, 100%. I was actually working with my climbing coach, and he assigned me to read Allegory of the Cave. And the key takeaway was this whole not, you have different levels of knowing and different levels of not knowing. And being so humble and aware of all the things you don't even know, like the shadows in the cave and what they are, was so eye-opening, whether it's, objectively not creating moral judgments on a route, or in business, objectively not having predispositions around what we think the outcome will be, whether it's a sales conversation or a business loan, has been really helpful of just being aware of how little we do know and how we need to continue being students in every aspect of our life is really
For
fascinating.
sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, Hazel, especially because you continue to go so deep and you really are continuing to be a student of what you're teaching. How do you define inspiration and what keeps you going deeper and what keeps you on track as a student?
Yeah, I think when it comes to inspiration, there's this really like fine line between inspiration and comparison. And I think that we're always treading that line in the modern world because we have so much around us, like social media, online space, podcasts even, it's like we're constantly getting like bombarded by messaging. And for me, like the real difference between inspiration and comparison is inspiration it needs to feel a certain way. It needs to feel light. It's really like an embodied thing, where you feel like this deeper pull or tug towards something rather than you're like, oh, this person's doing this thing, and then what does it say about me? And so then I'm like, feel heavier, and I feel like I have to fight harder to catch up or to not get left behind, or um, to sort of fulfill the story that I'm telling about myself, or kind of like whatever it is. Um, and it's really interesting, what triggers the comparison in us and what triggers the inspiration. And it's not always like what we want it to, like sometimes I'll see people climbing super hard on social media and I want it to be inspiring, but I end up comparing myself. And it's like, why is that? Why has it triggered that in me? And then that brings up a lot of kind of like ego stuff, shadow stuff. um, so yeah, I mean, I don't have all the answers there, but I think the main point for me is that like how it makes you feel.
Yeah, I feel like
Yeah.
that's a really, really powerful and important differentiator, the difference between inspiration and that comparison. And I'll give two examples, one in climbing and one in business, where I could tell the difference. So recently, climbing outdoors, I went to Pilot Mountain, which is one of our local crags, and was with a mentor and saw this route that was a 5-9 route. And I hadn't led in North Carolina a 5-9 route outside. And I didn't want to do it that day because it ended up raining. But they had been calling to me for 2 months. The reason it felt very much inspiration aligned is when I went back the next time, my body wasn't feeling it, so I didn't go on that route. But then last weekend we went and I was with a partner I trusted. I was feeling good. And I went over to the route and everything in me just felt excited. Like I just felt
Hmm.
excited, empowered, all the things, inspired. I felt so aligned with that choice because it was something for me and it wasn't about anybody else except for what I wanted to do. And the route just looked fun to me. So that's like a climbing example. And there's also the negative climbing example of, oh, this person got on this route. I should be able to send that route. And then there's a total different energy of like pressure and looking at
Hmm.
how the people at the crag might be judging me or thinking assumptions or am I going fast enough, which is comparison instead of inspiration. So when I'm on a climb and I'm inspired, I am fully present. I am fully excited. I am fully doing it just for me. And I don't care what anybody else thinks. In business, I remember last year we were working on a rebrand and I had an idea, but it wasn't quite the right name for the rebrand. And I'm just thinking like all of the things that are so painful about rebranding, the technology, all the things. this year I went back to Simon Sinek's Start With Why, and it found the actual perfect name for our rebrand. And so we're actually in the next 2 months working on our rebrand. And to me, that the energy of that feels inspired and aligned, which is easier. So when we're inspired, to me, it's aligned, it's for us, and it has a true purpose and meaning behind it. I don't know how that resonates for
Totally.
you.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I think alignment's a nice word there. It's kind of like, I think you can then ask like what needs to be aligned, and like maybe it's your values, maybe it's like the season that you're in, you know. Um, and I think that there's also something interesting when you're out of alignment. Why is that? And could you be in alignment? It's like in the climbing example, like, how do you turn that around? When you're feeling that like more pressure, because you can't just be like, "Oh, I'm not climbing today because I don't feel inspired," or whatever, It's like as an athlete, if you'd never climb, right? Or maybe you would, but you wouldn't climb like you needed to climb. So, um, I think, that's kind of the next interesting question there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's go with that. Why not? How do we get back into alignment when we recognize we're out of alignment, right? I think one of the things that comes up for me is, first of all, recognizing that we're not in alignment so that it's not a blind spot. It's not something we're totally unaware of. And then maybe paying attention to the thoughts or the voices or the storylines that are coming up that help us see why we might be out of alignment, and what kind of shadow things are coming up, or anxious thoughts or judgments or moral predispositions. And then, so for example, on a route, if it's a busy crag and I'm starting to get in my head about I'm climbing too slow, or people are judging the way that I'm doing this route, or if I don't send this route, I'm less of a climber. That is very much imposter syndrome. It's very much about comparison. And then how I might get back into alignment would be coming back to my personal core values around climbing, which is fun, community, and learning. So I might say, cool, how can I have fun on this route and ignore the people at the crag? What can I learn from this route if I'm struggling and it's becoming more of a project today? How can I have a great time with the people I'm here with that are my community? So that's one idea.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's how I'd probably approach it first as well. Another way you could word that as well is like coming back to your big why. It's like maybe instead of three things, it could be like one thing, the kind of the big powerful driver. The other thing that I quite like to do in that situation as well, specifically that climbing situation, is I like to go, okay, well, this is my ego. This is just my ego. And actually, like if I fall off that route and that thing that I fear happens, maybe that's actually going to be good. Maybe that like feeling of having a bruised ego is good for me. And if I think about it in those ways, it can be good for me, because even though I'm feeling it, I'm not letting it change my behavior. So it's kind of
Yeah.
like, where do you put the power? And so I quite like that as well. And then you can have fun with it too as well. And you can just be like, oh, this is just like this part of my brain that like doesn't like these situations, or tells this story that's not really like my truth on a deeper level, but like shows up because I'm human and I've got an ego and a sense of self and all the rest of it. And um yeah, that can be a fun little experiment as well.
Yeah, I like the idea of making it fun and also creating that separation of the ego and reminding that we're human. Sometimes I forget and I think I'm superwoman, and I'm like, Holly, you are a human. This is a normal part of the human experience. And let's challenge what you're thinking today. So we're going to pivot a little bit. I want to chat with you specifically around your strong mind framework. I talk about the fear method that I did my TED talk on, but I love the strong mind framework. It's super powerful, and it actually, taking your class, helped me fine tune even other templates and ideas for how I help my clients in business. So you've helped thousands rethink their relationship with fear. What would you say people most misunderstand about failing or falling in your case?
Yeah, so with take I take falling first. That's so I think climbing. Um, for the people who aren't climbers listening, it is possible to fall in a safe way. That's, a lot of climbing now uh, is safe to fall. But we still have this kind of part of our brain where we don't like that sensation. We don't know necessarily what's going to happen when we fall. So there's like unknowns there. There's going to be some fear of injury. And just in general, when you think about it, we're clinging to the side of a rock face and then we're going to fall through the air, be caught by a skinny piece of rope with webbing tied around our waist. And then we're going to like slam into this like really solid structure potentially. So I think the first thing is just like, it's obviously very normal when you think about it in those ways that we would be scared of that, especially if we didn't practice. But then where people go wrong is that they then avoid that thing. They go, okay, well, if I have fear around it, then I should avoid it. And then the other thing that people do is they go, oh, but I see that other people are falling. So, like, why am I scared? I'm going to just do it. And then they force themselves to take falls that they aren't ready for. So then we use the comfort zone framework to help people find the sweet spot, which is basically just like a type of exposure therapy, if you're familiar with that term, or graduated exposure. And we help people find a sweet spot in terms of their stress response where they maybe are a little bit scared, feel a little bit excited, but it's totally manageable and it feels positive. I think that's the main thing there, is that it needs to be like a eustress response, a positive stress response, rather than like a distress response. Because when we feel distress, that's when we start to create negative associations with the thing that we're doing. And I think that can be a useful framework in other things as well. Like I think a nice one it crosses over to in like a general career space is like public speaking. Is like if you go up on stage and you're completely distressed, it's not going to be helpful for your learning. You also do a terrible talk, which will then create more negative association, right? Because you won't be performing very well and maybe the outcomes aren't going to be what you wanted either. But again, if you keep staying in your comfort zone and you don't do any public speaking that feels remotely challenging for you, then of course you stagnate. You don't build mental resilience for that thing. So yeah, there's some misconceptions around that part. And then with failure, I think, that fear of failure is a more complex one. It's definitely, there's a lot more to unpack and it's very much connected to other fears. I think a lot of people's fear of failure, when you really start to unpack it, is really fear of what people think, but on this level that not necessarily everyone feels like they can operate on with their psychology, if you know what I mean. It's complex essentially, but maybe I think one of the biggest sort of like false assumptions, or like where people go wrong, is to think that they are immune to it, that they aren't, essentially that it's a blind spot for most people, is what I would say. That fear of failure, fear of what other people think, it will be showing up somewhere in your life, most probably in subtle ways. And it's bringing people's attention to that is, I think, one of the hardest things that I do as a coach, because so many students come to our courses for the fear of falling, and then they go through the chapters on fear of failure and they go, oh, wow, this is really big for me. But how to get those people through the doors initially has been really hard from a business perspective, because most people are not super aware of how that impacts either their climbing or their life.
Yeah, that's a really good point. A lot of the clients I work with, we help them around their marketing. And so they're really good at the thing that they deliver, but they also oftentimes are marketing to themselves and where they are, and not where the people that they want to attract are. And so when we're marketing to a group or an audience that is not aware that they have a fear of failure, you're not going to be very successful. Now, if you do fear of falling because that's accessible for your particular audience, and then you tiptoe into fear of failure, they're like, oh my gosh, like she sees me, she hears me. I didn't even realize this was a thing. So when we market to a blind spot, well, yeah, we have to educate first before we can actually attract that right client. And this is something that I see a lot of business owners do incorrectly, is they market to the blind spot, assuming that their potential client will understand that, when in fact they don't even know that's a thing, right? So on that note, you've already identified fear of failure, and the shadow stuff is a really huge part of a challenging area that you're coaching on. What are some other behaviors or mindsets that keep climbers stuck in fear loops for years that might also apply on the business side?
I think a big one for people in my community in both climbing and in business or other career stuff is kind of like hiding behind this idea of like, I don't care. This isn't really important to me. Um, it's just work or it's just climbing. Um, it's just kind of like a bit of an apathy, a lack of ambition. And people think it's because they really don't care, when often it's because that's the much more comfortable place to operate from. And if they were to um, challenge that or confront it, they might find that actually they did want to strive in their business, or they did want to strive as a climber, and they would find it a lot more fun and engaging with a bit more. And it's maybe to say that they don't care enough is the wrong way to think about it. It's almost like they care too much, but it's scary. So I'll just pull back, because if people see that I don't care, or that I'm not really bothered and I'm not trying, then I can't fail. So, it's just a different type of fear of failure, if that makes sense. Like, we commonly think of fear of failure in this, like, I'm really ambitious, I've set this goal, and now I've piled the pressure on and it's all just getting a bit too much. Whereas a lot of times what I see is like the other way. And so sometimes I think about that. I like borrow some of the language from attachment theory, where it's like, are you anxious attached, or are you avoidant attached? And normally we use those terms for like relationships, but I think that they cross over pretty well with like how we relate to what we're doing in our lives as well. And I see a lot of climbers like cling too tight, and so they're like this anxious, like, I need to train, and that's where you get these overtraining people who can't take a rest day. And then you get the avoidant attached, where it's like, I don't care about climbing, it's just a sport, whatever. And then they're the people who would benefit from, you know, being a little bit more intentional, and bringing a bit more energy to what they're doing.
Yeah, and then you get the beautiful combo of the anxious avoidant together, and that's just kryptonite. I see the same thing. I'll have these calls with prospective clients or networking calls, and I'll ask them about kind of pulling back the covers on their business. What is their current revenue? What is their conversion rate? What do they aspire to? And it's interesting. Number one, a lot of them can't answer those questions. Number two, there's shame or discomfort in sharing the answers to those questions. And then three, a lot of them won't set goals. And that's, to me, avoidant of, well, how are you making decisions in your company and in your business if you don't actually have goals? And secondarily, how are you measuring any kind of success of where you are today and where you've come from if we're not actually looking at metrics? So avoidance, you guys, is not getting you anywhere. And then also the anxious side of that is the constant, like, you're awake at night.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're like telling yourselves all these different stories. You're exhausting yourself. You're depleting yourself. There's so much pressure that you're not even enjoying the original why behind of why you started the business or why you started climbing. And so I think this all comes back to awareness and coming back to the core of why you started the thing in the beginning. So there's a lot of challenges there, quite a few challenges there. I did want to ask you, so you're saying that, and this is one of the biggest things I took away from your class that was very helpful in business that is missing, I think. So this could be a great idea for maybe we come together and create something. So you said that, falling is a skill. In business, falling is a skill. It's failing. It's like different levels of falling or failing. What are some parallels that you see between the two, either in your work or just in this discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I see more parallels. Like, I guess if you're using falling as like a metaphor for failure in climbing, just because obviously, um, a lot of the work I do is also around just like um, falling actually being something successful because we need to practice that thing in climbing, which, there's something there in there as well. Um, but um, I think the more crossover is between the failures. And I think, the most obvious thing here is like in climbing, um, falling is successful because it means that you're operating in a space near your limit, right? It means that you're challenging yourself optimally. Like if I never fell off anything, it would mean that I would be under challenging myself. And that's the same in business, right? It's like if you don't have something happen in your business that didn't pan out, like either you're just super, super lucky or you're just not pushing hard enough, right? You're not being creative enough. Um y- you're not striving in these important ways that indicate a healthy business, I suppose. Um So yeah, I think they're the crossovers, and I think again, another crossover there, like a nuance there, is that you know we don't want to fail drastically in climbing. We don't want to fail in the way that either like it really scares us or freaks us out, so like we get like a kind of a mental injury, a mental setback, and equally we don't want to hurt ourselves physically. And it's the same in business, right? We don't want to take out hundreds and thousands in loans and then just you know like be risky with it, right? If we've never taken a loan before, as just like a simple example, we have to build up our skills and our expertise gradually. And so it's not just like, okay, I'm going to go in and fail. It's like how to have the right mindset and the right balance that reflects where you're at. Like I don't have tons of experience with business, so what I do with my business probably feels quite um moderate compared to what someone else does. But with my climbing, from the outside, it's like, whoa, she crazy. But it's like, no, I've just done this for 30 years.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the parallel between fear of falling and the fear of taking risks in business, as well as the fear of failure. And this is just such a powerful metaphor because you have the fear of falling class. I feel like in business, a huge miss in the market and even in our education system is there's not really a fear of failure around business or risk aversion, or kind of how do you start building your confidence in these roller coaster moments of being an entrepreneur and a business owner. And I got to tell you, if you're doing business right, it is a roller coaster. That doesn't go away. And if you're not pivoting pretty frequently, you will be out of business eventually. And so they correlate quite beautifully, and even the dichotomy of your comfort zone to the different stretch zones to the trauma zones are also relevant. So, in our business, when it's the kind of like our out of comfort zone would be speaking on stage for some of our clients. It could be taking out advertising for other clients. It could be taking out a lofty loan for something that historically has worked and tripling down on that thing. What we don't want to do, like you said, is we don't want to create so much fear that creates a traumatic experience, or it doesn't reframe this fear of falling or this fear of failure in a positive way. It's actually creating more stress. So some clients taking out that loan is helpful, and it actually creates more spaciousness for them to double down and be successful and be confident. Whereas other clients, it creates so much more pressure for them, and it creates this resounding story of failure and financial pressure because of different historical things they have with their families. And so for each of us, it's just, what is that stretch zone, like out of our comfort zone, but not to like trauma, right? Or in
Yeah.
our case with climbing, death. Obviously, we don't want people dying.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
always bad.
Yeah, right. That would be terrible. That would be terrible. But it's just really about stretching that zone and that muscle. And for me, like with our business owners, it's reframing what they consider failure as, what did we learn from this so-called failure, this launch class that didn't sell, this thing that didn't go the way we had planned it, this revenue slump, that whatever. I'm actually kind of curious if you have a business moment that felt similar to a fall on the wall, or, I mean, you're more used to falling, or like a failure or something on the business side that might resonate with our listeners.
Yeah, I've had a few. I think maybe the biggest one was that I tried to build like an online subscription community for people interested in mental training, in climbing. And it was one of those classic mistakes of thinking that your audience is more like you than you know, or at least I thought some of my audience, there was enough people who were interested in mental training and psychology as like on a long-term basis, and wanted to grow with other people over time. Um, and one of my business mentors pretty much advised me against it and was like, the subscription model's really hard. You'll be chained to it. You know, like it's going to be harder. Just because it's cheap doesn't mean it will sell. It's just as hard to sell something for £6 as it is £600. You know, a lot of this sort of things. But I was just like, I really felt like I needed to do it. Like it really felt like a kind of a passion project. And I just put a lot into it. I spent pretty basically months of work um, when I could have been climbing myself, you know, because I'm still more passionate about climbing than I am my business. Um, and it just failed. It didn't work, and it was pretty obvious right away that it wasn't going to work. And it was also quite obvious right away that I didn't want to even do it. Given the reality of it, I had my why, but it was not, the reality of the why was not what I had envisioned, I suppose. And so that was a failure. That was a big failure. But I did learn a lot from it. And what I learned from that really shapes how we do things in Strong Mind still now. And I learned a lot about myself and how I wanted to run my business. Um, and so, yeah, you know, now I chalk it up. It still hurts a little bit, you know, I think mostly just from the time perspective, it hurts, but that's okay. Um, Not necessarily from an ego perspective. It was more just like, oh, I put all this time and effort and money into something that just didn't pan out. Um, but it is really valuable. You know, that failure has been very valuable to me as well. So that's how I kind of reframe it and think about it now.
Yeah, and that's a really positive reframe. I mean, I've launched things that failed. When you've been in business for 8 years, like if you say you haven't failed at some point, you're lying. Let's be real here.
Or you're
And the
just not
way,
trying hard enough, right? You could just be
yeah,
playing it really safe, right? Same as climbing. Like you can go
yeah.
climbing and never fall off anything, but it means you're just doing stuff that's too easy.
Exactly, exactly. So I think it's almost better to fail and fail fast and learn from that and reframe it. Those are the most successful people that I work with, are the ones that really put it on the line. They listen to what inspires them. And sometimes it doesn't pan out, and that's okay. And we learn from that, and we pivot. And so on that, I want to ask you, what does healthy striving look like as a founder or for a climber? Like, what is healthy striving?
Yeah. Yeah, I thought a lot about this actually. And I like to borrow a term from Brené Brown, which is wholehearted. Um, Even though it sounds a bit cringe, I just can't think of a better one for like how it feels. And basically, it's sort of just this idea that you're striving from this place of wholeness and sufficiency in yourself. So it's like I'm happy with myself. I'm happy with where I am and who I am and on the path that I'm on. And anything more than that is great. And I'm psyched for more than that. And that's what that striving is. But I'm not striving from this like place of lack and this place of low self-worth and this idea that I'm constantly chasing my tail. I'm always on the back foot. I'm always trying to catch up to other people around me or to a previous version of myself. And I don't think it's as simple as like you're either one or the other. I think we go through seasons, and sometimes you could strive a little more wholeheartedly, and at other times you're not. But yeah, I think that's the sort of like the general idea. But I think the thing that describing it doesn't quite get at is the feeling of it. It really feels a certain way. It's definitely a pull rather than a push. And it feels like exciting, positive, aligned, to use your word from earlier in the conversation. Um, and I think that one thing that people confuse about this type of striving is they think that it's like less than other types of striving, that it's like striving, but like you're also being self-kind, or like striving, but you're also being gentle. Like, but for me, it's like not a less than. In fact, for me, that kind of striving feels like a more than if you were striving from fear, if that makes sense. Because I think that you're not, when you strive from like fear or lack, there's these things pulling you back, whether you know it or not. It's kind of like running, but someone's got hold of your sweater. Whereas when you're striving from this like place of wholeness, it's like you're totally free. And so actually you can strive in like a much bigger way than you could do if you were coming from a place of like chasing your tail.
Yeah, man, that's like a whole can of worms we could open up. And it really, it's the thing with being wholehearted, like as you described it, and striving from wholeheartedness. I have yet to meet anybody or have an experience where that's something that I'm able to hold daily or even hourly, right? Like, so I think it's about
And with
checking in.
it can't be with everything you do, right? Either, right?
Exactly.
Um, and that's why I think it's hard for me because I'm right now I'm trying to strive in my climbing from that place. So my business, I'm not striving as fully as I could be if I didn't also have my climbing, and I also have a little girl as well, you know. So um, that's part of it, is kind of what you choose to feel that
Yeah.
way about.
Yeah. Well, and even if you have that one thing, whether it's climbing or business, I think it's also checking in with yourself daily and knowing that with the pressures that we have in life, because man, they did not explain to us what adulting was really like. I'm like, my goodness, this whole adulting thing has so many challenges and pivots that I wish they had a whole class on, so we weren't in such a hurry to get older and grow up. Um, so I find that for me, even with climbing, I have really good days where I'm definitely in that wholehearted space. And then I have days where my anxiety is heightened, my stress level is heightened, I haven't slept as well. And it's really hard for me to access that space of wholeheartedness. So I think it's also, like you said, having that kindness and self love and expressing, like, hey, today I'm still going to climb, but I also know that I'm going to push it in a different way. And this is like type 2 fun today. I'm not going to push it past my stretch zone. I'm still going to do it, but I'm also recognizing it's not quite as wholehearted today because I have these external things going
But
on. So I think
maybe
it's a, yeah.
maybe that is wholehearted striving though, because it's
Hmm.
understanding that you're human and who you are, right? And if maybe that is what wholehearted striving looks like. And on the days that you pushed past it because you're like, I want to do this, that's maybe striving from more a place of fear, you know? It's like wholehearted striving, I think, is also meeting yourself where you're at and
Hmm.
showing self-kindness and vulnerability and being honest with yourself as well, as this kind of like fizzy excitedness. Does that make sense? Like, I guess it's like
Cool.
allowing for like psychological flexibility,
Yeah.
whereas when you're super rigid and fixed and you're striving from this place of like nothing less than 100% every time, that kind of really that's kind of a brittle type of striving. That works for a couple of weeks, and then if from a climbing perspective you get injured, you burn out. And you see athletes who operate like that, right? And they're always
Yeah.
injured, or they just disappear. And you're like, what happened to that really amazing climber? And it's like, oh, well, because they were striving from that place of lack, and they
Yeah.
ended up burning out because they couldn't show up and be like, you know what? I can't train 100% today. I actually need to step back a little bit, because that's
Yeah.
real life.
That's a good reminder that having that flexibility and freedom and understanding with yourself is wholehearted. That's something I think I'm still learning. Like, and it's funny, my coach and I are recalibrating the training plan. We took a couple months off because I'm outside a lot, and he was like, just enjoy the process. And so I'm noticing while I'm not training that when we go back to the training plan, there are certain things I want more flexibility around that are still aligned to the long-term goals. But I think that's a great reminder of how we do show up in our business in a different forms or parts of our life where it is wholehearted. It's like, I'm really stressed out. I'll tell the team we're starting later today. Or I have something that comes up and we push something back for a client. I think that is, like you just said, it's a great reminder, great reframe that truly is likely wholehearted living is that kind of kindness, that freedom, that flexibility, still disciplined, but with flexibility around where you are that day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Well, so that's a perfect segue into peak performance. So I'm really curious how you're going to answer this question from taking your class. How do you define peak performance and how did you arrive at this definition?
Yeah, okay, so some people might find my answer a bit unusual, I suppose, but for me, performance is actually how you focus in the moment. So I'm at peak performance on a climb if I'm in flow and I'm operating from like a place of optimal functioning. So it's like how I focus in the moment. But peak form, so I would more call that like performance or performance state. And then peak form is how I feel physically and mentally like at this season in my life. So like um I was in peak form when I sent my hardest sport route in 2022, for example. Um and I've not been on as peak form since then. Like I was mentally and physically very fit for that type of climbing. Um, but performance itself is more the state that we're in.
I like that. I like how we can separate those two things to identify where we're at currently, but also have the ability to do peak performance regardless of what's happening mentally or physically and being in that flow state, which kind of relates to what we're talking about healthy striving, right? So peak performance and understanding where your peak form is kind of a softer, more flexible way of approaching seasonally where your peak performance is showing up. I really like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think
Um,
that especially when it comes to aging and injury, people are just like, well, why bother? Because I care about performance and I can't perform how I was. Or like, I'm still kind of recovering postpartum. It's like, but I can still access those states of performance in the body that I'm in, if that makes sense. So it's like, and we can still strive towards that even as we age or even as we're injured or something like, you know? Um, so I think that
yeah.
can be motivating for a lot of people to understand that.
Yeah, actually I'm curious with aging and with injuries. So part of why I took your class, why I hired a climbing coach was I'm in my 40s now, climbing in your 40s. I had a shoulder injury that lasted 2 years, and somebody I was dating was like, you should hire a climbing coach, not to get better, you will as a byproduct, but to actually bulletproof your body for long-term successful climbing because you love it. It's obvious you love it. And so I hired that coach. But what I have noticed is one, there's this whole hormonal shift, whether you've had a baby or you're in your 40s and you're going through perimenopause, which there's such little research around. So, what are some personal challenges or obstacles that you faced along your journey to peak performance or that you help coach people through?
So like peak form we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, oh man, I've had so many injuries and um, mostly because in my 20s I just like climbed outdoors. It was like almost like I was too focused on my why and not enough on like longevity and looking after my body in general. I was just like, I want to climb and just like went climbing the whole time. And I'm hypermobile, so I do need quite a lot of input physically to like not get injured. Um, so yeah, I think I had a long-term shoulder injury that got misdiagnosed for many years, I think in part because of my hypermobility. But I did eventually sort that out. And again, it's one of those things that still hurts a little bit because it was a lot of years of having my climbing be compromised and a lot of sort of suffering and not being able to climb how I wanted to climb. But then I'm also like a more resilient climber now because of it, because I understand that I do need to do strength training. I can't just go rock climbing all the time. Um, so that was a big challenge. And then, of course, being pregnant, having my child has been massive. But I honestly, it's gone way better than I expected. I thought it was going to be, um, you know, the hardest thing to come back from, and that I might not ever come back. And I don't necessarily like that phrase "come back," but um, there's so many unknowns with that. So, but honestly, it's been great that whole journey so far. So, but
Yeah.
it was still a challenge, and I needed a lot of help. And I think that was something I didn't do in my 20s when I didn't have much money, is I didn't ask for help enough. But now I'm a bit older and wiser. It's like, oh, I don't know anything about what happens to my body when I get pregnant. How about I get a coach who specializes in this, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the main thing I learned from that is, and the same with my business, honestly. Time and time again is asking for help is one of the biggest lessons. It's just trying to do it on your own. It's like, why? Like someone else has learned all of this stuff. You don't have to learn it all yourself, you know? It's like, let's share expertise.
100%. One of the key elements in the fear method that I teach, the R, is reach out for the support that you need. And that's so huge. We put so much pressure on ourselves. There's, the compare and despair. There's this perfectionism. There's this, successful in the U.S. American dream, and my goodness, that's exhausting. So get out of the rat race, get off the hamster wheel, and ask for support. People have these skills, and you don't need to know all the answers at all. I promise you. Um, we're coming quickly to the end of our hour here, so I'm going to ask you one question on revenue, and then we'll do our closing questions and let people know where they can find you and reach out to you about your program. Um, when have you left money on the table in your business, and what did you do to fix it?
Yeah, I think my answer is really similar to what I just said, which is asking for help. I was lucky because help kind of came to me pretty early in my business, so I didn't have to leave as much money as I would have otherwise. But just working with that person made me realize how much money I would have left because I would have undercharged. I think the climbing industry, especially in the UK, um, there's a very much a sort of philosophy of like do everything as cheap as possible, don't oversell yourself. Um, it's hard to kind of stick your neck out and be like, actually, my expertise is worth a lot and I'm going to charge for it. And if I had not had mentorship around that, I would have left thousands and thousands and thousands on the table. So I was really lucky in that way. But, I imagine I still probably do underprice a little bit. But I think Yeah, I think sometimes in the business world, there's too much emphasis on
Yeah.
pricing higher and
Money.
higher. And I actually kind of like to push back on that a little bit too. Um, I think you've got to do what feels right as well. Because again, it's that comfort zone thing. If you end up being in this state of stress because you feel like you've got to live up to this sort of a high perception of value, um, you can't just switch that off straight away.
Yeah,
Yeah,
100%. That's a really valuable point with pricing and with charging in your what that comfort or stretch zone looks like for each person. It's different. So when we do pricing conversations with our clients, it's not just like what's the market rate, what's the value of this change or this pain point you're addressing for your audience, but it's also what are you comfortable selling? Because if you're super uncomfortable on a call or your content is uncomfortable, people can see that, they can feel that. And so you're not going to sell. You're going to be very unsuccessful. So it's finding that sweet spot of what that pricing is for you, as well as for some of our clients. We are intentionally charging slightly below market because their why and their legacy is impacting more people. And they are able to do that by pricing it so that it's more affordable for the audience that they're targeting. So lots of different
totally.
variables. Yeah.
Yeah. With our online courses, it's always hard. And I think what we've aimed for is to offer discounts and scholarships rather than lowering the price to what then feels uncomfortable the other way, to be
Yeah.
like, okay, we are like literally transforming someone's climbing experience, but we're charging the same as like a few pairs of shoes or something, it's
Yeah.
like what we're doing is so much more impactful than your climbing shoes.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. It really, really, truly is. We're gonna do a few wrap up questions, and I'll let you get back to your day. Thank you so much for taking the time to share with my audience your profound psychology lessons, the fear of failure, fear of falling, all of that is so valuable for not just our climbing listeners, but also for our business owners. What is the best one piece of advice you would share with others today?
um One Piece. Well, I would say ask for help, but because I've already said that too many times, I think look inwards. Like, if you're listening to this, you probably are anyways, but like, you can't really do anything well in your life, I don't think, and you certainly can't strive from that place of wholeheartedness or learn how to manage through failure or any of these things that we've been talking about unless you kind of start like looking inwards, and being like honest with yourself about what you see.
Yeah, 100%. What is the legacy you wish to leave behind?
So I'm not a big one on legacy, honestly. I don't really think about that too much. My main focus from that perspective is just setting up my daughter up well for her life. But if there's one thing, it would just be, in the climbing community and potentially a bit further afield, getting people to question their psychology a bit more, to just helping nudge a few people in the directions that we've been talking about. If I could leave that, then and potentially touch a few people's lives in that way, then I'm happy with that.
Beautiful. For our listeners who are climbers, is there a call to action you have for them today?
I mean, if this goes out on the 3rd of January, you've got a few days if you want to join the Strongman program. If not, if you don't get a place on that because we just have a sales week for a week, then I highly recommend joining our newsletter. We call it Thought of the Week, and we talk about things that like we've been talking about today. And again, we're not pretending to have all the answers. It's very much nuanced, philosophical, um, but also usually has something that you can take away and get something out of. And whether that's something to chew on or something practical, there's usually some kind of takeaway.
Yeah, thank you. And Hazel's being very humble. I recommend you follow that get on the newsletter, but also get on the waiting list for Strong Mind because it's transformative and very powerful. I've taken it personally, so I can say that. And she and her partner are super down to earth. There's nothing intimidating or scary about joining their community, joining their class. So highly recommend it. Thank you so much, Hazel. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Holly.
Thanks for spending your time with me today. If this episode supported you, I'd love for you to subscribe, leave a review, or share it with someone who needs it. When inspiration spreads, real impact follows. I'll see you next time.